Imagine a world where just one tiny drop of your blood could literally tell you everything. You know, whether a hidden disease was creeping up on you, or if your heart was just perfectly healthy. Now imagine a 19-year-old college dropout stepping up and claiming she had actually built that world. And the craziest part, some of the most powerful people on the planet completely believed her. Welcome to this Explainer. Today, we're unpacking the wild story of Elizabeth Holmes and Theranos. It is a fascinating and honestly deeply unsettling look into America's youngest self-made female billionaire and how she pulled off one of the absolute biggest deceptions the medical field has ever seen.
We've got to start with the hook, right? The big idea that captured everyone's imagination. What if one drop of blood changed everything? I mean, think about it. Nobody likes needles. Getting blood drawn is terrifying for a lot of folks, not to mention time-consuming and really expensive. So Elizabeth Holmes comes along and pitches this incredibly alluring premise. She's saying, let's replace those scary, massive vials with a simple, virtually painless finger prick. It was an idea that felt like it belonged right out of a sci-fi movie. And man, everyone desperately wanted it to be true.
Okay, let's dive into this, because this number right here, it is absolutely staggering. At its absolute peak, Theranos was valued at $9.4 billion. Yeah, you heard that right, $9.4 billion. Investors were just throwing hundreds of millions of dollars at her, celebrating Holmes as the next great Silicon Valley visionary. But, as we're gonna see, this entire mountain of wealth was built on a complete 100% fabricated lie.
Chapter 1, the billion-dollar vision. To really wrap our heads around this fraud, we have to understand the founder herself. Holmes was driven by this lifelong, deep-seated obsession with becoming wildly rich. So in 2004, at just 19 years old, she drops out of Stanford to start Theranos. But here's the thing, she didn't just want to build a company, she wanted to become a living legend. She took that classic Silicon Valley mantra, fake it till you make it, and practically turned it into her religion. She obsessively studied Steve Jobs, right down to adopting his iconic black turtleneck uniform. But she went even further than that. She actually trained herself to speak in this performed, hypnotic baritone voice, artificially dropping her natural pitch just so she could command more authority in boardrooms. It's wild. She basically manufactured a persona to perfectly fit the mold of a lone, world-changing visionary.
Chapter 2, Building the Illusion.
Let's put our investigator hats on for a second. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the stark contrast between what they promised and what was actually happening behind those sleek glass walls in Palo Alto. Theranos claimed their proprietary device, which they called the Edison, could run over 200 different tests from that single drop of blood. But the truth? The Edison was a total failure. It literally just did not work. So what did they do? Well, they cheated. Technicians were secretly instructed to take those tiny blood samples, dilute them to make them stretch, and then run them through totally conventional commercial lab equipment made by companies like Siemens. Then they just report the results as if the Edison had done all the work. Unbelievable, right?
Now you might be wondering, how on earth did nobody notice this? Well, Holmes understood a very foundational, tricky truth about human psychology. Credibility is a product. If you don't have the actual science to back up your claims, well, you just have to manufacture that credibility somewhere else. And she did this by assembling an absolutely impenetrable shield around herself. She effectively locked the actual medical science community completely out, so nobody could look too closely at her broken machines. And this is exactly how she manufactured that credibility. Just take a look at these names. George Shultz and Henry Kissinger, both former US Secretaries of State. James Mattis, a four-star Marine general. I mean, these are men who literally shaped the modern world. But notice what is glaringly missing from their backgrounds. Not a single one of these highly influential men had absolutely any medical or laboratory experience. Zero. And guys, that was purely by design. Think about it. When you walk into a room with this kind of heavyweight board backing you up, nobody is going to have the guts to ask the hard scientific questions.
Chapter 3, The Whistleblowers Speak.
Okay, despite this powerful board and all that media hype, a secret like this just can't hold forever. Inside the company, a culture of absolute fear, strict non-disclosure agreements, and severe intimidation was taking root to mask a very terrible danger. And we really need to pause here for a second and drop the Silicon Valley hype, because this is where it gets incredibly serious. Real patients, real lives, real consequences. Theranos had partnered with Walgreens to roll out actual testing centers in stores. This meant everyday people were getting their blood drawn, and those flawed Edison machines, along with the rigged Siemens machines, were spitting out completely wrong results. People were being told they had severe conditions they didn't have, or even worse, they were told they were perfectly healthy when they actually needed urgent medical care. This wasn't just a tech glitch, this was a catastrophic danger to human life. But fortunately, there were a few people inside who absolutely refused to look away. Enter Tyler Shultz. He was just 22 years old, and get this, literally the grandson of board member George Shultz. He saw the fake data and bravely tried to sound the alarm internally. Then there was Erica Chung, another young employee who also raised serious concerns. When the company completely ignored them, they risked everything. Theranos sent private investigators to follow them around and unleash these aggressive legal teams to intimidate them into silence. But their immense courage, combined with the relentless, dogged work of Wall Street Journal investigative reporter John Carreyrou, finally broke the dam.
And this brilliantly illustrates the exact moment it all came crashing down. On October 15, 2015, John Carreyrou published his explosive piece with this devastating headline: "A prize startup's troubling setbacks." That was it. That was the crack in the glass. The grand illusion was finally shattered, and the entire world was finally allowed to look right behind the curtain at the massive fraud taking place.
Chapter 4. The house collapses. Let's move to and see how this builds, because once the truth was out, the unraveling was just incredibly rapid. Federal regulators immediately swooped in, inspected the labs, and found catastrophic systemic failures. That supposedly brilliant $9 billion empire shattered almost overnight. By July 2016, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services completely banned Holmes from operating any labs. Walgreens immediately terminated their partnership. And then, the final hammer dropped in September 2018 when the SEC charged Holmes and her chief operating officer, Sunny Balwani, with massive, widespread fraud.
Which brings us right to the dramatic 2021 criminal trial. Now, the defense played a very calculated card here. Holmes played the victim. She blamed Sunny Balwani for psychological abuse and control, basically claiming she was just a true believer who was sadly surrounded by bad advisors. But the prosecution? Oh, they had an absolutely airtight case. They stood up and showed the jury emails written in Elizabeth Holmes's very own handwriting, proving that she deliberately, knowingly falsified reports. She even hid the failures when the military was testing the Edison device for potential battlefield applications. The whole narrative of her being a well-intentioned visionary, yeah, it fell completely apart right there in the courtroom.
In late 2022, the final judgment was handed down. Elizabeth Holmes was found guilty of wire fraud and conspiracy against investors. The sentence? 11 years and 3 months in federal prison. The exact same woman who had been celebrated, plastered on the covers of Forbes and Fortune magazines, was now a convicted felon.
Chapter 5. Lessons from a fraud.
So what does the spectacular rise and fall of Theranos actually reveal about the culture we live in today? Look, this isn't just a story about one bad apple. It's practically a mirror reflecting the soul of Silicon Valley. It highlights the intense, very real dangers of valuing a compelling narrative over actual, verifiable substance. Holmes didn't pull this off alone. She had a lot of enablers. Those board members failed because they were dazzled by a story they simply wanted to believe. The media completely failed by writing these breathless cover stories about a healthcare revolution without ever demanding independent verification of the technology. And smart, wildly wealthy investors failed to do basic due diligence. Why? Because they were utterly blinded by FOMO, the fear of missing out. What if this is real? Is a profoundly powerful question, and it made very smart people act very foolishly.
So the crucial point is this. The ultimate victims in this whole mess were not the venture capitalists who lost millions, or the powerful board members who took a hit to their reputations. The true victims here were the ordinary patients, regular people who made profound, terrifying life decisions based on totally invented data. We're talking about a woman who was falsely told she might have HIV. We're talking about patients who literally altered their medical treatments based on a lie. Look, when you fake it till you make it with a new social media app, that's one thing. But when you do it with human health, that is an absolute tragedy.
A charismatic vision and a compelling story are simply not substitutes for the truth. Whether it's in medicine, finance, or whatever the next revolutionary tech happens to be, the world is full of people who are more than willing to sell you a miracle. When someone promises to change the world with just a single drop of blood, we absolutely must demand the proof. So it leaves us with this thought: what miracle are you being sold right now without asking the hard questions? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. If you found this breakdown helpful, remember to always seek the truth, demand the actual data, and of course, stay curious.